So, everybody, now I would like to describe my experiences with the nodes falling into Purva Ashadha Nakshatra. As many as you might know from me describing it a little bit, I myself have Rahu, as well as Uranus and Neptune, falling into the sign of Purva Ashadha. So having Rahu here, it's worth explaining a little bit about the nodes. The nodes are something that really splits our life in half. So the first part of our lives, up to about age 36, is when Rahu begins to really awaken in ourselves. It's the same age that Saturn matures. After Saturn matures, Rahu wakes up, because now Rahu knows that it can start scratching a little bit into what the psyche has been lacking, because now Saturn is mature. Saturn has gathered its strength, its stability, and what it requires to function as an individual stably, ideally. If you've got a good Saturn, especially, the age of 36 will consolidate and round you out. So that's when Rahu begins to wake up. Because Rahu, as Ernst Wilhelm has described it, is kind of like, it's the jungle. It's the gold over there in them hills. It's the unknown, the dark unknown. It's something that we have never dug into because we've always been stuck on Ketu for so long. So it ought to be understood that, how Ernst describes it is like, back in the 1600s, Spain and the European colonies were starting to develop wealth, and they wanted to have more wealth, but they could lock up the fortress. They could spend a little extra money to send someone like Cortez out on a trip to go find India, or Christopher Columbus. The European colonies could send guys like this out to the New World to poke around, see if there's anything interesting over there. Finding new routes to India was the main thought. And during that time, the guys went out there, got a bunch of cool things, plants, and then brought them back to the European colonies. The colonies said, there's some great stuff here. We've got a little extra money in the tank. This could be a whole world out there that's unexplored, and we want to put our flag down there. So send out the guys. If this thing fails, it's not going to screw us. It's a risk. It's a risky venture that could be worth it. We have to be secure first, but they were at that time. That's why they pushed out to go and check out what's beyond the known. So this is what happened at this time. Now, this shows that Rahu and exploring, throwing into the unknown, requires that solidity, requires things to be solid, to be stable. And this is how Rahu unfolds at a certain age. So for those with, the nodes in the nakshatras, there's going to be an emphasis of the early part of life or the later part of life with the nodes. But the nodes are always working through us. I myself am age 32 right now. And again, the nodes open up at 36, but it's not till 43 that Rahu matures. And at that age, there's always lots of crazy things going on at that time. The midlife crisis does come from Saturn and Rahu activating. The midlife crisis in particular is Rahu maturing at 43 and then Ketu maturing at 48. And the process that leads up to those is a very sort of difficult and meticulous process that kind of builds up there. Hello, Mo. Nice to see you. So Rahu needs this stability in order for it to open itself up. Now, that's sort of, let's call that a general intro. Now let's talk a little bit about, again, the nakshatras, the nodes falling in this nakshatra. So let's begin with Ketu falling into Purvaashadha. What you might find with Ketu is that Ketu operates very strongly and unconsciously until Rahu matures. And then when Rahu matures, this allows Ketu. Ketu is sort of something that we've done for our whole lives, that we've grown addicted to, that we've grown obsessed with, because it's a security paradigm that we have a hard time letting go of. So Ketu in Purva Ashadha is this consolidating personality, right? Of course, we've read from Vic Dicara already that the Rahu and Ketu, the nodes, they are powerful. And there's a power that comes from Ketu in Purvaashadha. But it's a bit individualistic and non-cooperative, and that clashes with this nakshatra's fundamental nature. So just like the other foolhardy nakshatras, what we find with Ketu is that a Ketu in Purvaashadha person probably can be foolhardy. They make hasty, ill-prepared, and over-ambitious enterprises and decisions. They think that they're going to be able, I'll be able to pull everybody together to do this thing. Like, I just know it. This is such an important social movement. As soon as I raise the flag and rally everybody up, they're all going to come crawling out of the woodwork to help me with my enterprise. And then they go to do it, and there's not as much fervor, not as much vigor, not as much cooperation as they thought there was going to be. So someone with Ketu in Purvaashadha probably finds it difficult, A, to bring the varchas, the proper enthusiasm, and they also probably find it hard, lacking that enthusiasm, to bring people together, to bring people into an assembly, into a cohesive whole that has the power to create an unconquerable force or action or movement in the world. So the Ketu, Purvaashadha Ketu person probably is strongly always trying to have these movements, trying to have people work together with them, and they're probably waxing and waning between the feeling of, this is who I am, this is who I have to be, and this is something that I was born to do, but they get disappointed because it's either too hard to bring people together, or when they do bring people together, it's hard to wrangle them. It's hard to control the people. It's hard to manipulate them towards a positive, constructive end. So what happens is they bring all these people together and everyone's looking for leadership from the Ketu and Purvaashadha person. But it's not until they integrate Rahu in the opposite nakshatra, in the opposite sign, through the opposite sign lord, that this person begins to find meaning and quality of depth and detail surrounding Ketu and Purvaashadha. So it's the Rahu in the opposite that's really going to bring out the quality of the proper quality of Ketu and Purvaashadha. So of course, Purvaashadha is opposite two possible nakshatras. The early part of Purvaashadha is going to be opposite Ardra. And then the latter part of Purvaashadha is going to have Rahu in Punarvasu. The person with Ketu in Purvaashadha who has Rahu in Ardra is going to find a little bit of a different way that Rahu needs to function. With Rahu in Ardra, there's a little bit of a difference. Rahu in Ardra is a powerful signature. It destroys things that deserve and need to be destroyed. It's merciless towards the wicked, false, and the deceitful. So this Rahu in particular can bring out this desire to destroy evil in the world, to defy lies and injustices. And there's no mention of the nodes here in Ardra. But the Rahu in Ardra is going to add certainly a ruthlessness. Rahu in Ardra probably has to work out a lot of hatred. And it probably has to deal with lower chakra stuff in order that ultimately Rahu is what is going to narrow and make a fine point out of the Purvaashadha Ketu person's desire to assemble people. The Ketu in this person of Purvaashadha has a desire to bring people together for some kind of purpose, but often they don't know how to wrangle them, or they don't know what to bring these people together for. Rahu in Ardra probably feels like they have a lot of hatred. And so early when Ketu is mainly operating, but Rahu is immature, the Rahu is still present. And they have an integrated Rahu, which means they're probably pulling together for people together for personal angry reasons. You know, Steve bullied me when I was in grade 3, and now Steve has and he's trying to be a politician, right? So this person early in their Ketu process might rally everybody together to go politically against Steve. Not for proper political reasons, but because he slighted me when he bullied me when I was young. So I'm trying to pull these people together just to get back at him. That's because Rahu is still working out the gunk, the anger of Ardra. Once this person solidifies and understands the positive quality that anger can represent and channels it through a divine love for the good things in life by helping to mitigate the bad things for the sake of everybody, not just for personal reasons, but a cleansing sacrifice and surrender for the sake of Dharma. That's when that person's Rahu in Ardra starts to come into being. Rahu in Ardra needs to accept the nature of anger and use it constructively. And that's when the Purvaashadha person's constructive, well-meaning anger through Rahu and Ardra is going to find expression. And that the Ketu Purvaashadha desire to assemble people is going to find good, authentic energy and vigor and expression. Now for Rahu in Punarvasu, which is kind of closer to where I believe that's where my Rahu is. It's hard to say. Vic says my Rahu is in Ardra. Earth says my Rahu is in Punarvasu. So it's hard for me to say. I'm sorry. Excuse me. I've got Ketu in this place. But I digress. I'll get to that when we flip it. But for now, we're talking about Ketu in Purvaashadha and Rahu in Punarvasu. So for Punarvasu, we find that there's a welcomeness where fresh enthusiasm for new ideas is welcome. But long-term commitment and patience is something that's tougher for Punarvasu. It can get stuck in a repeating pattern of behavior. So Rahu in Punarvasu is probably looking to always make things fresh, as we've read about it. It takes what's dried out and stale and brings ardram, it brings freshness and moisture to it. So the nodes falling into Punarvasu don't have any specific resonance, but we do read that the fixed, tougher planets can be inflexible and have excessive need for newness. So Rahu and Punarvasu can get bored and distracted and stuck in its old patterns. And it actually wants to get away from the pattern. Rahu and Punarvasu is always trying to make things new and fresh. But what Rahu and Punarvasu needs to realize eventually, it will when a person turns 36 or gets to be 43 years old when Rahu matures, that keeping something fresh and new sometimes involves having a consistent, a formula for keeping things fresh and new. Because if you're always just going from one thing to another thing to another thing, it's like the water is getting scattered. You need to set yourself on one dedicated skill, one dedicated field, and it's in that field that you can let the water flow through. It's interesting that Punarvasu produces ardram. It produces wetness. And having Purvaashadha Ketu is going to be a part of this wetness, a part of the apam, a part of the moisturizing effect that Punarvasu seeks to have to make things fresh and new. So with Rahu and Punarvasu, there needs to be a consciousness of trends, of what is the next hot thing, or what is internally, as the world changes, what are people suffering through? What is the suffering that's happening right now? And everything that happens that's a new suffering comes from the ancient way that humanity has always been. CMO. There's nothing new under the sun when it comes to the human nervous system. The human nervous system operates the same way. But let's say, for example, phones come along and all us monkeys in meat suits are looking at our screens all day. That is something new that Punarvasu needs to see happening and make it fresh, allow things to have this newness, but don't let that get dry. Don't let that get stale. How do we use these phones to the proper purpose? So Punarvasu is taking the new things like a phone, which humans have never been used to. It's like, oh, this is the new fresh thing. How do we keep it fresh? How do we keep it from getting stale? Rahu and Punarvasu is just going to stick to one endeavor, one way of understanding the problems in the world. It's going to get stuck on patterns, and it might not be able to remain fresh. And so Ketu and Purvaashadha wants to bring everybody together, rally everybody together with enthusiasm, varchas, for some kind of assembly, some kind of cohesive reason, semitir. The Rahu and Punarvasu needs the enthusiasm that Purvaashadha wants to express. It needs to learn to make it present and functional in the immediate contemporary time, the immediate contemporary world. And it needs to be for the return of eternal principles of goodness that also aligns with today's time. Again, the human nervous system has eternal ways of operating at its best, but it needs to do so in a contemporary way. This is what Punarvasu needs to get in tune with, so that Punarvasu Rahu doesn't end up just being, like a Christian zealot who says, all that needs to happen is that people need to love Jesus more. It's so obvious to me. Now I'm going to rally everybody together with my Purva Ashadha Ketu and rally everybody together for the same purpose, which is to just love Jesus more. Which there's some goodness in that. But if the person's early in their Rahu, they're before 36, they're going to find they rally people together and they don't even believe in in how true, or they're not open-hearted about the purposes that they're gathering people for. And people smell it, and that's why the Ketu is constantly trying to bring people together for a purpose that is not fresh, that's stale. That's early Rahu in Punarvasu. Eventually, Rahu in Punarvasu learns how to keep themselves fresh, how to look into their own psyche and see why they're taking it so personally that the world is not considering this thing, that the world is not thinking about Jesus more, that the world's not thinking about yoga more, So the Rahu in Punarvasu needs to find the freshness in themselves. Find what actually works for them. That's not just some social thing that they eyeball and say, oh yeah, that's something that my Ketu could expand on. Not just latching onto the Me Too movement and saying, oh, everybody should do this because I feel empathic and it's going to make me look good if I jump on the bandwagon that everybody else does. You need to find something that actually refreshes yourself and your soul with Rahu and Punarvasu and make it work in your experience. So for sure, and you got to dedicate to it. So you'll dedicate yourself. I'm a bit like this because this is where I think my nodes are flipped. Rahu and Punarvasu needs to find something that works for them, that they even can expand through. You know, it's like you get into yoga and you find the depths of Patanjali, and you get into Kriya Yoga, and you know, that's like this ancient thing, but you can make it fresh by adding your experience to it. And you can even rally people with Ketu and Purvaashadha towards that end, teaching classes on how to make the same old dry thing fresh and new at a large scale to change society with it. That's the Purvaashadha Ketu. Mike Bailey wonders if there's a cult leader-esque energy to Purvaashadha. I would say there could be. Depends on the planet falling in there. The nodes could have that energy. I can have that energy with my Rahu and Purvaashadha and Uranus and Neptune there. It's the desire to lead people and to gather an assembly of people to do something constructive. And when that is your desired energy, at first especially, you know, it's not as important for the immature Purvaashadha person, wherever the nodes or planets are in there. The immature Purvaashadha person wants to bring people together because that's an energy that I know I can do. I love guiding large groups of people towards some end that feels to me to be constructive. And if they tell me that I led them towards some constructive new social change, that's good for my ego. So now I want more. I want how do I influence lots of people? That's what Purvaashadha wants. It's as Purvaashadha matures that they find out that it's not about leading the people for the sake of leading the people. It's about using the power that you have as a Purvaashadha person to make positive changes. And it's the change, it's the root, it's the thing itself, it's the water itself that you focus on. You become a channel for the power, and the power is not a channel for you. You are a channel for the power. That's a good question, Mike, and I hope that that's useful. So I like how I just conveyed that. Now let's switch it. Let's have a conversation about when you have, like I do, when you have Rahu in the sign of Purvaashadha. Now, we just mentioned just a moment ago, it's useful to consider the idea that Purvaashadha can have a sort of like cult leader-esque mentality if it gets out of hand. And why that happens is when especially with the person with the nodes in with the nodes in Purvaashadha, just like the Rahu in Purvaashadha, the person wants to bring people together. That's the Varchaha, it's the enthusiasm and passion to bring lots of people together. Once that water is flowing, the Purvaashadha person feels very confident. This is my energy. I'm good at gathering, holding all these people together towards one consolidated purpose. And everybody remembers that this was my doing, my group, my enterprise, my unconquerable decision to bring these people together. And the problem with Purvaashadha when it's immature is that these people know they want that energy. They want to wield that large influence. So if they get attached to wielding influence for the influence's sake, if they get attached to the idea of being a power, of channeling power for power's sake, they will be more invested in the flowing of energy in an egoic way than what the energy is for. They have to let go of their taking it personally that they channeled all this power and focus more on developing an understanding of how this objective, how this social change, how the thing I'm influencing in the world relates personally to me, to my soul. I've experienced it as being good, and I want to use my influence to garner people to go further with this action, this movement that I've experienced for myself a deep philosophical, spiritual, nurturing connection towards. It's helped me evolve, and I want to help others evolve through it. And it doesn't need to be the whole world. It's not about getting famous and having everyone in the world see how good I am. I'm such a good boy. It's about me sharing the evolution that I've experienced by looking within myself to find whatever it is that the Purvaashadha wants to address, especially through in this position, you're going to have Ketu either in Ardra or in Punarvasu. So one of those two is going to develop some kind of self-realization that you now want to express to others. And your influence as a Purvaashadha, Rahu Purvaashadha, will allow you to spread positive vibrations and knowledge about this evolutionary thing that you've discovered for yourself and loved for yourself. But until that point, the immature Rahu is probably just wants to grab people, bring them together, and say, hey, everybody, I'm this important person. I'm this important wielder of social influence. And again, as we've read in general with the nodes in Purvaashadha, we read that the Nakshatra Purva Ashadha, having the nodes there, the nodes are powerful, which suits this nakshatra well. But they are also, the nodes are individualistic and non-cooperative. And this can clash with this nakshatra's, Purvaashadha's nature. So when Purvaashadha malfunctions with Rahu there, it can bring out this sort of feeling of foolhardiness. And they're hasty, they're ill-prepared, and they do these over-ambitious enterprises. They attack opponents they're incapable of defeating, and they embark on journeys they lack the fuel to complete. There's this desire to just get something going, to bring everybody together. So two things will happen. Number one is they'll be super enthusiastic about this special thing, everybody. Come together. Come see the special thing that I'm doing. It's so important. You're missing out if you're not doing this thing. And they know the enthusiasm, the varchaha, that to get people excited. But then people come to see this thing and they realize this thing actually isn't as exciting as this person was trying to make it out to be. This person just wanted to be patted on the back and congratulated for being the person who got excited about something. But the thing itself was nothing special. So he's crying wolf. It's like opposite of crying wolf. He's crying that gold is over in them hills. He's crying gold rush, and everybody goes to rush over, and there's no gold. There's only a tiny little speck of gold. It's like, why'd you get so excited about it? Well, I wanted everybody to know that I'm this person who's special and who can call everybody to be excited about something. And they're like, blah. So now the Rahu and Purvaashadha person feels soiled in this very important dimension of who they are. You know, they've tried to wrangle people together for this positive thing. Now no one believes that they can actually reel in something special. So it's either they wrangle together for the wrong reasons, or they bring a bunch of people together. They have the Rahu desire to bring everybody together for some kind of purpose. But once all the people are gathered together, they have no control over them. They can't wrangle them to do any kind of constructive thing with the people. They're like a dog chasing a car. Well, they don't know what to do once they get the car. And so the Rahu, immature Rahu in Purvaashadha, wrangles together people, has this influence, but then doesn't really know what to do with them once they have them, and can often be spilly and messy with how they organize people to do these things. And everyone's like, who is running this show? And somewhere along, it's a immature Purvaashadha who just wanted to gain the power, but is letting the power be an expression of them, rather than them serving what the power is intended for, which is the movement itself, which is this positive foundational social change that they've experienced the goodness of in their own personal way. That's a mature Rahu. That's a Rahu that has kind of let go of the excitement of the power, and now almost just has to do it because it's an obligation because of some important thing that they've experienced. So what that important thing is probably going to be based on where their Ketu is. Ketu in Ardra has probably experienced some kind of bad thing, some kind of conspiracy, some kind of, something has happened to the Ardra person where they are constantly on the lookout for evil, for bad people. And a lot of the times with Ketu and Ardra, you'll realize that with Ketu anywhere, you're taking something too personally. You're too close to it. You have a responsibility as someone with any planet in Ardra to be Shiva, to be Rudra, to destroy the things that are bad in order that the good things can come, particularly with Purvaashadha. So Ketu with Ardra, the purpose that the goodness that the Rahu in Purvaashadha is trying to bring is partly based on an evil that the Ketu in Ardra has seen. It's this evil that's stopping us from bringing the water. And so we need to get excitement and enthusiasm to stop that evil from happening. Or that the goodness of Purvaashadha is going to help to mitigate an evil. So Ketu and Ardra, what they have to, at first, they're going to be trying to bring people together for personal reasons. Like, again, with Ketu and Ardra, it's like early in their life, they got bullied by this guy named Steve. And so now, before they're 36 and 43, Steve comes up as this political person, and the Ketu and Ardra person wants to rally everybody together in order to take down Steve and his terrible political policies. Not because of Steve's political policies, but because there's a personal attack, some personal energy that the Ketu and Ardra has to get out. It's hatred, but what happens with Ketu and Ardra is that as they try to rally people together to destroy something, people begin to smell it's not the objective that the Ketu Ardra person is interested in. It's like hatred for his own father, or hatred for her own mother, or qualities in her mother that she hasn't yet integrated, or qualities in his father or his mother, or something that happened to him, an uncle that molested him or her. Something happened to them where they need to channel their personal angst to destroy the bad thing. So what they need to do is, with Ketu and Ardra, you need to do some deep self-healing therapy, psychological counseling, and looking within yourself to find out the personal dimension of your anger so that you can cleave yourself from that and use your anger constructively. That's nodes in Ardra. Then once the Ketu and Ardra person, after about 36, 43, what's going to happen with them is that the Rahu in Purvaashadha is going to pull you into dealing with people and force you to reckon with how personal you've taken things with Ketu and Ardra. And then Ketu is going to eventually mature, and you'll realize how much of your anger was not being used constructively or in the right way. People with Ketu and Ardra also ignore their anger. And then they do this Purvaashadha thing, and they've got secret anger, and everybody smells it. And you'll be pushed around. It's Rahu and Purvaashadha learning to be about the objective and not taking things personally. That's going to force you to out what you've neglected with Ketu and Ardra. The anger you've neglected, or the lack of anger, etc. The integration of anger is an important thing for all of us, but especially anyone with anything in Ardra. Now, with the nodes in Punarvasu, here now we have Ketu in Punarvasu and Rahu in Purvaashadha. And I believe that this is my personal signature. What we have is that the Ketu person is, with any planets in Punarvasu, you need to make the old and dry fresh and new. So Punarvasu Ketu and Punarvasu, early on in their lives, they're going to try to, again, wrangle people through the Rahu energy of Purvaashadha. They're going to try to wrangle people together for the purpose of some important thing that Punarvasu has discovered. It's yoga. Sometimes it's zealous religiousness. It wants to be basically regarded as someone who has caught onto an important, perennial, eternal dimension of the human nervous system, or human philosophy, or political philosophy. They're going to find some old way of doing things, and they're going to want to take it from an ancient understanding and make it new. That could be, people with Ketu and Punarvasu are often finding new things that are their new philosophy. For my sake, or for the sake of anyone with this, you get into Taoism. It's all about water and being peaceful. And then after a while, you can go into something like Marcus Aurelius. It's like, oh, this water has been too feminizing for me in my experience. And now Marcus Aurelius is this hard guy who's got these hard ideas about determined, distinct political philosophy, about practical material reality, about economy. You can get into Sun Tzu. It's the art of war, and understanding how to apply the art of war to your own psyche and to the psyche of conquering things. But then you get, I went through a lot of these different philosophies, and for a while, in each phase, I was like, this is it, everybody. This is the thing. Like, you're all missing out by not doing this thing. Eventually, the Ketu and Punarvasu person can consolidate a lot of these different things and land finally on some philosophy, some technique, some principle of science, some ecological or economical principle. They'll solidify their experience in the field of one of these things. And then they will be an authority on it. And then they will be able to use their Rahu in Purvaashadha. It's the Rahu in Purvaashadha is going to be the reason why the Punarvasu person consolidates all of their interests into one solid thing. And the Rahu in Purvaashadha is going to need to rally people together for a specific thing. Punarvasu is going to have everybody rallied up. They're going to be probably a social influencer, rallies everybody together to express some kind of succinct purpose. And people look to the person and they say, so what is this purpose that we're into? And with Ketu and Punarvasu, it's going to change from day to day, from year to year, right? Oh, well, we're into this, everybody. And everyone's like, okay, let's try to build, we're into Buddhism. Okay, well, let's try to build a Buddhist temple. And then they get into the Buddhist temple. They've gathered everybody together for it, but they don't have longevity, because that's how Ketu and Punarvasu is looking to make things fresh. By doing so, an immature Ketu Punarvasu person has no longevity. They don't know how to stick to one thing. So they'll rally everybody up to make a Buddhist temple for a year or two, but it takes, like, say, 5 years. And then into those 2 years, the person says, you know what? I just realized I'm not actually into Buddhism. I'm going to just completely left turn this and go completely into Christianity, because that's what my heart feels. And then so they start to get into Christianity. They build a great, let's spend the next 2 years trying to rally everybody together to make a Christian temple. So the Buddhist temple falls away because now there's no leadership there, unless hopefully, if the person's got good things happening with their Ketu Lord, they can let that thing not be a waste, hang on to it long enough so that people can manifest it and nurture it, and another leader can be put in its place. Good, glad to help. Now I'm going to the Christian thing. Get deeply into that, gather people up to try and make people love Jesus more, and then eventually the Punarvasu person says, again, I got to change. This isn't really me. Eventually, once Rahu begins to mature, the person's going to find that they're not advancing in life by just doing all these little things that don't add up to anything meaningful. So that's why when the Rahu matures, the person realizes that I need to stick to something. What's the most meaningful way that I can commit myself to bringing people together for something that is eternal to me? It's something in myself that I know that I've experienced for years. As always, I end up landing on the same thing. For me, so far, this seems to be astrology, Kriya yoga, yoga in general. You know, of all the things I've gotten interested in, I'm falling into the specific things that work specifically for me. So you're not going to see me talking about the Me Too movement because everyone is talking about this big Me Too movement, or just as an example, I'm not against it. I'm just saying any movement that comes along that's a fad or didn't come from my experience, I'm not as interested in it as much, right? I want it to fit and be centered and relate to me, to my life experience. That's when the Punarvasu begins to mature through the Rahu and Purvaashadha. So yeah, you know, I could go on forever about these, but I love talking about the nodes in the nakshatras, so I'm glad I got to speak to that. Now, a second lesson that Vic mentions that he learned is that success requires focus, but focus is not the same as uniformity. By using the word samiti, the sutra teaches us that this focus does not eliminate diversity. It concentrates diverse talents and resources into a single goal. It's a very wonderful point. That's a very important one for this whole nakshatra, especially the nodes. I'm burning these in my brain as I speak. Now we have one question here. Hello, Amo Ghoul. Yes, I am back in my bedroom. Now, Amo Ghoul, you've asked about the graha maturation. I've actually my dog is barking. It's going to be bugging me. I've actually just recently made a video discussing the evolutionary script, which includes in it the maturation of the grahas. So check out my video on that, but essentially the grahas all mature at certain scripted ages. Saturn matures at 36, Rahu matures at 43, Ketu matures at 48. And there's usually a shakeup that happens at those ages that forces you to mature in the node. So Rahu begins to awaken at 36, it matures at 43, and that's a midlife crisis shakeup that forces you to stop screwing around with what you're doing with Rahu. It's at that time that the Purvaashadha Rahu person is going to use their social influence to come together on something that's meaningful to them that they have to commit to. And that objectivity, that doing it for the thing itself, not for me, but for this movement that's bigger than me, so that I'm a channel for something bigger. It's that the Rahu person is going to experience and enjoy being a part of, and that's going to make them question the problems, the gunk associated with Ketu and Ardra or Ketu and Punarvasu, the things that you're taking personally and not allowing yourself to be a channel, an objective channel for goodness.